Greetings and well met, my friends. I'm Lydia, the Halfling Seamstress, and today we are traveling back in time again. How far back, you may ask?
Further than we've ever gone before.
All the way to the 15th century. This project is based off this artwork in the calendar section, specifically the month of June, from the illuminated manuscript Très riches Heures de Duc de Berry, which was painted between 1412 and 1416. Now, going that far back, we don't have a lot of detailed information on the construction of clothing, and we certainly don't have any paper patterns, but clothing historians have researched and deduced using archaeological finds and manuscripts such as this to extrapolate how kirtles probably were sewn together. So first off, we have to talk about drafting. I'm gonna ramble a little bit here, so if you don't want to hear about how I reached the pattern I did and just want to get to the pretty sewing, you can skip ahead to the timestamp here. Up until this point, I had pretty much only ever used commercial patterns, and the few things I did draft myself were very basic shaped garments, medieval men's tunics, and poofy pirate shirts, both of which are just variations of squares and rectangles, and usually have a fair bit of wiggle room. Medieval kirtles are exactly the opposite. They are tight. These are the days before bras, corsets, and stays, so kirtles are clothing, but they're also the support garment built in. The bodice section is pretty much form-fitting to be able to hold your assets in place. Now, I had planned to buy a pattern and just make the necessary alterations, but try as I might, I could not find anything online that matched what I was looking for and that got solid reviews. And the idea of drafting this form-fitting, supportive garment freaked me the heck out. I'd started a different, highly tailored pattern back in March, and let me tell you, when you've done 3 mock-ups and swapped patterns and you still aren't close to anything resembling a wearable garment, the imposter syndrome starts to hit something fierce. I went through a couple of weeks where I doubted my abilities to draft, alter, and even sew. But I was rewatching some of my favorite costumers, and I came across one of Morgan Donner's old videos where she walks through the step-by-step process of drafting a kirtle. I watched it and went, yeah, that ain't happening. And then I watched it again and went, you know, this could be doable. And I did the big scary thing. I decided to draft it out myself. Now, because I had no idea how it was going to turn out, or if it was going to turn out, I did not film my drafting process. But I will say, if you too want a foolproof method of drafting a kirtle that anyone can do, including a potato with mild dyscalculia like me, go check out Morgan's video. It was a total game changer, way easier than I thought it would be. And I gotta say, putting on the very first mock-up and having it be 85–90% wearable right out of the gate, can you say confidence boost? It did need a couple little tweaks. Adding a little here, taking it a bit there, adjusting the slope of the shoulder seam, but all the places that needed adjusting were places that when I was drafting the pattern made me go, watch out for that spot, it'll probably need adjusting. So it was extremely reassuring to know that my instincts were correct and I had followed all the drafting steps properly. Once I was happy with the mock-up, and I did go through 3.5 until I got the right fit, I marked the last couple tiny changes on my body block pattern and also trimmed off the slope. Kirtles are sewn with triangular gores to give them swoosh, but if you cut the pieces out all as one, the edges that are cut on the bias will end up stretching and warping, and the silhouette of the dress won't look as nice. So instead I marked where I wanted the gores to meet up, and then cut the sides of the pattern flat. You'll notice that my pattern only goes to approximately hip length. This is because the gores will be added in later, sewn to the straight grain, so you can simply measure down from the waistline to however long you want the kirtle to end up. This also makes the pattern way easier to store. And then it was time to cut out the actual fabric. This is going to be a summer kirtle, so I'm using a cotton linen blend I picked up online. For the length of the kirtle, I measured from my waist to my ankle. Since this appears to be a working kirtle, it shouldn't drag on the floor. I did give it an extra inch or two just to be on the safe side, so I could decide later on exactly how long I wanted it. Then I cut out all the pieces with a generous seam allowance. I missed getting much footage of the gores, but to make them I measured from my hip to hem and then marked that length on a diagonal. I then pinned on the gores to the side seams of the body pieces, starting with the front edges. Again, to avoid bias stretch, I sewed bias edge to straight edge instead of bias to bias and straight to straight. It looks a little weird when you're first pinning it on, but once the seams are sewn and it hangs, it looks really good. Then I began the process of sewing the gores. Kirtles have a lot of long, straight seams, let me tell you. Gores don't have to take any pressure, so I sewed these seams with a running backstitch, doing mostly a running stitch with a backstitch every few stitches for extra security. Once the front side gores were done, I did the back side gores, then sewed one front piece to one back piece, joining the gores in the middle, and repeated for the other side. I saved the center front gores for later, which I'm so glad I did. For the bodice sections, I used back stitches as small as I could make them for as much security and strength as possible. Once I reached the gores, I went back to the running back stitch for speed. At this point, I had two identical half kirtle shapes, so it was time to add the back gore and stitch up the back. Before I went any further, I decided to finish the seams I had done so far. This fabric is lovely, but it did fray really easily, and it's way easier to finish seams when you're not wrangling a whole mess of fabric, especially when you're hand sewing. I went with a felled seam since that seems to be pretty universally historical. I trimmed down one edge, folded the other edge over the raw seam edge, and felled everything down with little whip stitches. I also used a metric heckin' ton of pins since this fabric did not want to stay tucked while I was felling. These long seams took forever. Seriously, I did the math, and each individual section of side seam and two gore seams took me approximately 4 hours to pin and fell. So 12 hours of construction time on this project was just taken up with felling seams. And we're not done yet. Then I was ready to add gores to the center front. These were sewn in exactly the same way as the others. Running backstitch to seam together, trim, turn, fell down to enclose the raw edges. Ah yes, the glamorous life of a content creator. To get the angles for these construction shots, I sit on the floor to sew approximately 90% of the time, and usually have on a comfort TV show or my favorite costumers on replay. When hand sewing a blue dress, one must also watch someone else hand sewing a blue dress. I decided to add a strip of facing down the center front so that when I lace up the kirtle there isn't strain on the edges. I cut 2 strips just longer than the center front opening and 1.5 inches wide. Then I pinned them to the right side of the center front and backstitched along the seam line. I wanted this edge to be crisp and flat, so I made sure to press it well before I folded it over. The edges got turned under to hide the raw seams and got felled down with whip stitches. With all the long seams done, it was time to stitch up the shoulder seams. I backstitched for security and then felled down the raw edges. Then I tackled the collar edge. I folded the edges under twice and felled it down. And I was finally ready to seam the kirtle together at the front. My measurements meant that I only had to seam the 2 front gores together and it was ready. I used the running backstitch for the seams and felled down the raw edges like for all the other seams. At this point, I was about to start marking the eyelets and I had a nagging thought of try it on first. And I'm so glad I did. It probably had something to do with the seam allowance I used for the facing, but it was a little bit too loose and not as form-fitting in the bodice as it should have been. And like I said, these need to be snug. I looked at how much needed to be taken in, thought about the different ways to proceed, and then decided to go with the fastest, probably cheating, but it's only going to make it stronger option. I turned the facing under itself and just whipped it down. Is that a historically accurate method? I'm not saying it is, but I'm also not saying it isn't. We don't have any proof that they didn't deal with an excess of fabric at the center front in this way in 15th century France. And with fabric being a dear commodity, who's to say that someone 600 years ago didn't turn their front facing under an extra turn to make their kirtle fit just right? It's one of the joys of experimental archaeology. So after that slight adjustment, I tried it on again, and it was back to fitting exactly how I wanted. So it was time to mark the eyelets. I started with chalk, making 2 parallel marks at the top of the neckline. Going down one side from the starting mark, I marked an inch apart. I'm using the traditional style of spiral lacing, so for the second side, I made the next mark only a ½ inch down from the starting point. Then I continued marking 1 inch apart for the rest of the way. Since chalk is notoriously bad at rubbing off, and I was planning on working on the eyelets during a little weekend getaway where the kirtle would inevitably be in and out of a bag in between sewing sessions, I gave myself extra security and went over each eyelet placement with a few stitches of contrasting embroidery floss. This was literally just a quick X or T over each marking, and I left both ends of the thread loose so I could easily take them out when starting a new eyelet. I fiddled around with some of the placing until I was happy. With spiral lacing, the stitches need to be off-centered from each other so the garment sits evenly, so there were a couple of marks that needed to be moved just a fraction of an inch lower or higher to maintain the even ratio. And then begins the long and repetitive task of stitching 27 eyelets. Tired of sewing nothing but eyelets? Time to take a mead break. And back to the eyelets. Sewing outdoors does make the task less monotonous, and amazingly, I managed to get all but 4 of them done before I got home. It was getting close to being done at this point. All that was left was lacing, hemming, and the dreaded sleeves. I knew I wanted to hang the dress for a couple days to let the bias relax, so the hem would have the best chance of being even. So I set it on a hanger to wait, and in the meantime, started on the lacing. I had planned on blue lacing, but a closer look at the manuscript shows that the lacing for this kirtle is actually red. Interesting combination, thought I, but I can make it work. I had thought about just doing a simple 3-strand braid, but then I decided to look at other historical options, and another one of Morgan's videos popped up. How to finger loop braid. I'm not saying I need another fibercraft in my life, but her instructions were so clear I figured I'd give it a go, using crochet thread. And it turns out it's actually really hard to film the process of finger loop braiding, so if you want a better look at the way I made it, check out Morgan's tutorial, the link will be below. All said, I love it, and I think of all the little accessories I've made to go with outfits, this may just be my favorite. It's so elegant and delicate, and once you get into the rhythm of the movements, it comes together quite quickly. I had guessed it would take me a couple of days to finish it, but I got the braid I needed in just over 2 hours. So I will definitely be trying this technique again, as well as looking into more finger loop techniques to expand my skills. Hems almost always go last, so I finally sucked it up and got to work on the sleeves, which I also drafted using Morgan's video. 9 p.m. sewing Lydia here, looking rather like a potato, but look, I just finished putting in my first sleeve mock-up. I am so proud of this. It looks so perfect right off the bat. Oh, I can't believe it. I look so much like a potato. But look at this. It fits. It's got good range of movement. I can do this, mostly. But this is... I can't believe it fits so good right off the bat. I love it. Oh my goodness. I love how this project is turning out. I just love it. One little adjustment later and I was ready to cut out the actual fabric. I made the adjustment on the paper pattern and then promptly decided to just use the mock-up for cutting out the fabric. I marked out the seam lines in chalk, and since this is a finicky area, I made sure to mark out my seam allowance as well. I cut out the sleeves separately instead of folding over the fabric, and I made sure to flip around the pattern so I didn't accidentally cut out two left sleeves. I pinned together the seams and stitched it together with little back stitches. And you guessed it, even more felling. Since sleeves are scary, I decided to procrastinate and finish the hem instead. I laid the kirtle out flat, found the shortest point of the hem, and leveled all the rest of the hem to match. I wanted a fairly small hem, so to make sure everything was even, I marked 1 inch all the way around. Then I folded the raw edges under twice, and secured the hem with what felt like 17 million pins. And the hem got felled into place. This is a good activity to do when you've got on a comfort TV show or movie. Makes the 2 hours of felling just fly by. At last I reached a point where I could procrastinate no further, and I had to finish the sleeves. To make things easier, I hemmed the cuffs before stitching them onto the dress. This was just a narrow hem, whip-stitched into place. I wanted to make sure the sleeves were completely in the right place before I started backstitching all the way around, so I basted them in place, tried them on, made a quick little adjustment which made them fit right, and then backstitched them into place. Since this seam is one that will potentially take a lot of strain, I did my best to make my backstitches as close together and small as possible. Like all my other seams, once I was done, I trimmed down one edge, in this case the dress side. Then I turned under the raw edges of the sleeve, pinned the turned edges into place, using my knee as a brace to help keep the tension steady and to prevent any extra fabric bunching up and making the sleeves be weird. And at long last, I reached the very final seam and the very last bit of felling. For this project, anyway. And there we are, a 15th century kirtle as inspired by a historical illumination. I absolutely love this dress. It is so comfy. And I would 10 out of 10 wear this style over modern bras and t-shirts. I can see many more kirtle plans in my future, and I love that having the body block pattern opens up room for a whole realm of interpretation and different styles. I am tempted to make another one similar to this, short sleeves and all, but make the skirt shorter for a more modern, medieval, history-bounding effect. I also want to make a fancy court kirtle with long sleeves and elegant silk and luxurious trimming. Add that to the ever-growing list of projects I want to make if time and money were no object. But for today, I successfully completed this project. It looks and feels amazing, and not to toot my own horn too loudly, but I dare say it turned out pretty dang close to the painting. And that is an incredible feeling. So thank you all for tuning in to my kirtle making adventure. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Apparently, it makes the algorithm happy. And if you want to see more geekery meets history sewing adventures, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and I will see you all in my next video.